Okay everybody, so today we're going to be doing required practical 6, which is a microbiology related practical, and as you might be able to guess, it's quite a safety oriented practical. As part of that, I'm just going to be going over some principles of aseptic technique with you all. Aseptic technique is a collection of techniques and methods by which we attempt to reduce the chances of contamination, both of ourselves and of the media that we're using. And each step is fairly straightforward, and combined they massively reduce the chances of contamination, which in this case can be very harmful. So part of that is we've got all our equipment here. So we've got our metal loop here, or its plastic pre-sterilised counterpart, which is a yellow one here, or you can get blue ones as well, but we're using this for today. And we've got our pre-sterilised equipment, which is always good to have. If we can use that, we will, and if we can't, then we're going to sterilise it ourselves as we use it. So, common sense practices here. I have decontaminated, I have disinfected this entire work surface with an industrial disinfectant. So that's been properly decontaminated. And you might be wondering why we're using a Bunsen burner, because we're not necessarily setting anything on fire, at least hopefully not. But what this will do is this will create, as long as it's on either a sort of semi-blue flame or a roaring blue flame, it will create a pretty consistent convection current of heat and air, or heated air, which will sort of balloon outwards throughout it and it's sucked back in. And what that will do is that will reduce the chances of any airborne bacteria or spores or particulates or contaminants from settling on our surfaces here. Won't necessarily reduce it to nothing, but in combination with other methods we're going to be using, it will certainly reduce it to an acceptable level for safety standards, and for also the reliability of our results, of course. So another part of aseptic technique is the proper handling of equipment. So, especially when we're doing sort of complex operations like transferring something from a bottle onto a plate and so on, we need to make sure that whenever we pick something up, so this is a sealed McCartney bottle, and you have smaller variants thereof, which we're going to be using later on. You need to make sure that whatever you're opening is as open for as little time as possible and is done in as sterile a way as possible. So in this case, I'm going to open this McCartney bottle, and often we'll have liquid media in these things, or sometimes we'll have solid media, and in this one we've got solid media, this smaller bottle down here. So in order to make sure that we're sort of minimising the exposure, especially when it comes to putting things down on the surface. So again, although we've disinfected the surface to a professional degree, we still want to reduce all chances of spreading any bacteria or contaminants. So part of that is making sure that we don't put anything down while we're using it in a sterile condition. So while it's in the air and sort of in this convection current, we can more or less call it sterile. But as soon as you start putting things down on surfaces, anything that it might touch is potentially a hazard. So, to sort of comply with that standard, we're going to hold any equipment we're using. In this case I'm using the metal loop just because it's the first thing I've got on hand. We're going to be holding it like we would a pen, or like most people would a pen. I'm sure there are some of you who would hold it in a different way. So holding it as we would a pen. And we're going to be using our little finger in combination with the sort of surface of our palm here as a grasping surface. And again, if you're left-handed, obviously you can accommodate and just swap things around. But for example, as we open this bottle, we're going to be nestling it in our little finger there and just twisting it gently. Not necessarily twisting with your right hand or your dominant hand, just twisting it with your other hand and opening it. And again, as well as trying to keep it as as open for as little time as possible, what we're also going to be doing, this is a separate part of aseptic technique, is what we call flaming the neck of bottles, especially if they're glass. Obviously if they're plastic, don't put it in a fire, that's common sense. But so every time we either open or close a glass bottle in particular, we are going to be again utilising our Bunsen burner to just flame, and I'll just demonstrate here. We've got our bottle, we've opened it, it's now potentially open to being contaminated by rotating particulates, floating particulates. So we're going to hold it gently, rotate it slowly in the flame, not too long, don't need to burn anything. And then that is now killed anything that may have settled on this neck on the interior. So then we would take our thing, our equipment, our piece of equipment, do whatever we need to do inside. So we collect our liquid sample or solid sample. And then before we put it back on, as we would with our pinky finger, we would then flame the neck of the bottle again, just in case we've introduced any particulates or contaminants. Obviously, don't start flaming the lid, otherwise you'll burn yourself. And also, it's wise to let this cool down for a bit, just to make sure it's not going to burn your finger, especially if you're wearing gloves. So that's now nice and tight, a bit warm. We can now set that down because it's sealed, so there's no interior contamination. And the same will go for smaller bottles with rubber stoppers. So, and this aseptic technique, the sort of concept of making sure things are open for as little time as possible, also applies to things like petri dishes. So, here I have a burner petri dish in that I set the gel and it's not worked very well. It's a bit splotchy and a bit too thin. So I'm just going to use it as a demonstration. Whenever we are opening petri dishes to either inoculate or spread, or even not necessarily write on, but certainly to interfere with the media in any way, we are going to open it towards the flame like that. So you're just tilting it away from the flame, which again prevents sort of the majority of bacteria from landing on and contaminating the dish. And we're also going to be contaminating it for as little time as possible. So if I just move this a bit further away so I can operate properly, open it like that, and then we're going to be doing whatever we need to do at this sort of distance, opening it as minimally as possible, and then closing it. Now, when it comes to sterilising metal loops, which is what we've got here, wire loop on the end of a pole, it's a very simple process. You probably won't be required to use this technique very often, because oftentimes nowadays we have disposable single-use plastic pre-sterilised equipment, but it's a good protocol to know just in case. So obviously, if before and after we touch any bacteria or any medium really, we want to make sure that this is as sterile as possible, both in terms of preventing contamination of our sample and in terms of preventing spreading of any particular pathogens when we've finished. So, you're going to hold it like you would a pen, as close to horizontal as you can, and we're going to hold it in the flame and just sort of gently, maybe hold it up to the hottest point of the flame. Make sure that loop, as you can see there, is red hot, and you want to make sure the entire length of that wire is nice and hot regularly, just to kill any spores or bacteria or fungi that may have snuck on board. So then we'll leave it to cool down for a bit, and sometimes you will have sort of a jar of distilled water to cool it down in, but we can just wait for a few seconds to let the wire cool, and then to make sure, making sure you're adhering to other aseptic techniques, you'd then do what you need to do. You'd spread your lawn, you'd whatever, and then as soon as you're done touching any sort of bacteria, you then do the exact same thing, just a decontamination. And then once you're done with that, you can then put your wire loop down because it's been sterilised, and you're going to sterilise it again before you touch anything else with it. So just hold it in the flame, fairly straightforward. Make sure everything gets nice and red hot. Okay, that's more or less the overall aseptic techniques we're going to be using. Hopefully we'll get on to the actual RP6 in a moment. So enjoy.